I never expected my own mother to declare, "Your children aren't welcome here this Christmas," as if she were passing a death sentence on the most sacred bonds I held dear. I said nothing, letting the hurt settle in like a cold winter wind as they left the room. What she didn't know was that the card she planned to use at dinner was already frozen, because I owned her entire account. My name is Ruth Ann Miller, and I am 61 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, but the weight of that sentence came from less than 20 miles away in my mother's small, aging home in Concord. For decades, Dorothy, my mother, wielded control over me and my family in ways so subtle, so merciless, that I found myself both blind and trapped. Yet beneath the quiet pain and long years of exclusion simmered a resolve, fueled by love for my children and a quiet intelligence honed by years of navigating financial complexities. This is my story of betrayal, calculation, and ultimately, reclamation. The tension began weeks before Christmas 2023, a season that typically brought family together but had grown poisonous under my mother's watchful eye. Dorothy had long held grudges and standards that no one but her could meet, and when my children, Jessica, Michael, and their families, were quietly uninvited, the message was clear. That afternoon, as I sat in the kitchen sorting through holiday gift lists and menus, the phone rang. It was my sister Nancy, hesitating before delivering the blow with careful words. "Mom said the kids can't come this year. She thinks it's better if you come alone." Her voice cracked on the final words. I stared at the receiver. The warmth I'd hoped for Christmas was frozen over with exclusion and disdain. "Tell her I understand," I said softly, "and I won't be bringing anyone." I spent that day recalling years of similar slights, the birthday parties where my children were left unmentioned, the school events ignored, the prayers where my grandkids were excluded. Dorothy's rejection was not new, but this blatant expulsion was a raw wound that pierced deeply. That evening, after the children had reluctantly accepted the verdict and retreated to their own homes, I wandered into my quiet living room and reflected on the early days of family gatherings. I remembered joyful Thanksgivings at my parents' house in Concord, full of laughter and warmth, before the shadows crept in with controlling words and jealous eyes. Dorothy, once a vivacious woman with a sharp mind and a fierce love for family, had over time grown rigid, turning love into weaponized judgments. Her bitterness seemed rooted not only in personal grievances, but in generational pains and unspoken resentments that had passed down like a dark inheritance. I realized then that this Christmas exclusion was not merely about the children, but was an expression of a toxic power dynamic that had long dictated my family's relationships. It was less about celebration and more about control. Yet within me, amidst the stifling cold, flickered a spark. I wasn't powerless, not anymore. I began sorting through years of bank statements and financial documents, organized meticulously in files I'd curated for decades. I had always been the family's discreet financial guardian, not just for my household, but for my mother's accounts as well. Behind the scenes, I had managed her Social Security benefits, Medicare plans, and even her investment portfolios. Sometimes without her direct knowledge, sometimes with quiet consent. While she wielded emotional authority, I held the keys to her monetary independence. That knowledge was both empowering and burdensome. It represented years of unseen work which she never acknowledged, but also the quiet leverage I could begin to wield. Late into that December night, I called Patricia Johnson, my trusted friend and bank manager, and explained the situation. Patricia was a no-nonsense woman with 30 years in financial services, who had seen her fair share of family conflicts spun around money. "Ruth," she said firmly after hearing the story, "you already have more control than your mother realizes. This exclusion at Christmas is just a symptom. You're managing funds that keep her afloat. You might be able to use this to restore some balance." Patricia offered to review the bank accounts under my guardianship and suggested legal counsel should I choose to assert my stewardship more formally. The road ahead would require strategy, patience, and courage. I nodded into the phone, hearing the weight of possibility and risk, but feeling for the first time in years the stirrings of hope. That Christmas Eve, at the restaurant Dorothy had chosen for her annual family dinner, I walked in alone. The atmosphere was festive, artificially warm, but shrouded in the unspoken absence of my grandchildren. The heart of the gathering unjustly denied entry. Dorothy greeted me with a satisfied smile, oblivious that tonight the balance of power was shifting. As the evening progressed, I listened as she held court, proud of the gathered guests, speaking loudly of family and tradition, deliberately ignoring the empty chairs at her table, the seats where my children should have been. When the bill arrived, the scene shifted quietly but irrevocably. Dorothy reached into her purse, pulled out her credit card, and swiped it. The transaction was declined. Confused, she tried again, more insistently. The card remained frozen. I leaned forward calmly. "Mother," I said softly, "the account your card is linked to is under my supervision. It was temporarily frozen earlier today as a precaution." Her face hardened into disbelief and rage. "You... what?" "I manage your finances, including this account," I continued, "because I've been entrusted to do so by both you and the bank. Given the recent tensions, I felt it necessary to take this step." A hush fell over the table. Eyes darted between us, the proud matriarch rendered powerless in an instant. Dorothy spluttered indignantly, but the damage was done. The crowd, sensing the shift, murmured quietly, realizing that the woman they'd tried to exclude held the true power tonight. My heart pounded with a mixture of triumph and sorrow. This wasn't a victory born of malice, but one necessary to protect my family's dignity, to draw boundaries where none had existed before. That Christmas was unlike any other, a quiet reckoning wrapped in soft lighting and forced smiles. But beneath it lay the foundations for something far greater. Justice grounded not in confrontation or revenge, but in the reclaiming of respect and autonomy. As dessert was served, I glanced at my quiet phone and thought of Jessica's calls, Michael's messages, all urging strength and resolve. I whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." The years of suppression, of ignored protests, had culminated in a single moment of clarity, and I was ready to ensure it was never repeated again. The cold days following that Christmas Eve dinner echoed with a chilling clarity I had long avoided. My mother's rejection was not an isolated act, but the culmination of decades of calculated exclusion. The winter sun barely lifted itself above the horizon as I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the comforting chaos of bills, bank statements, and old journals. This was no longer just about a broken holiday or bruised feelings. It was about uncovering the truth woven through years of subtle manipulation. The past began to surface in vivid fragments. I recalled my mother, Dorothy Miller, wielding her influence like a silent sword, cutting away at my confidence, eroding my family's unity through unspoken rules. Invitations to family gatherings carefully circumscribed, whispered criticisms disguised as motherly concern, and the way she systematically sidelined my children, the true victims in this saga of control. I turned to my journals, the carefully penned records of whispered arguments and halting apologies, pages that bore witness to words left unsaid and moments overlooked. In these pages I found patterns, a timeline of emotional exclusion, financial control, and growing isolation. In one entry from 2015, I noted, Dorothy commented on Emma's dress as too flashy. Later, Michael's birthday dinner was forgotten on her calendar. Jessica's promotions are met with cold silence during family calls. These were not mere oversights. They were deliberate chinks in the fabric of family connection. But the most insidious control was financial. Despite Dorothy's regal disdain, I had long managed her bank accounts discreetly, ensuring bills were paid and medical expenses covered. My role, initially born from duty and love, had become my leverage. I possessed knowledge and access that no one else in the family fully comprehended. One morning, I visited Patricia Johnson, my lifelong friend and the trusted branch manager at Wells Fargo in Concord. Over steaming cups of coffee and amidst the low hum of tellers and customers, I confided in her the painful realities of my familial struggles and the need for decisive action. Ruth, Patricia said with a gentle firmness, you already hold more power than your mother realizes. It's more than just money. It's the truth behind it. With the proper legal backup, you can protect your family and assert boundaries that have long been ignored. Her words were a balm, easing the knots of anxiety twisting in my gut. Together, we reviewed Dorothy's accounts, assessed their structure, and considered legal means to safeguard my children's and my own interests should the situation worsen. At home, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Dorothy's calls were curt, her visits sporadic but heavy with veiled threats. During one visit in late December, she looked me in the eye and hissed, "You think you can control me? This family worships tradition, and you're nothing but an interloper." I remained calm, masking the turmoil within. "No, Mom. I manage your finances because I have to, because nobody else will. But respect is earned, not demanded." Her lips twisted in disdain, but her eyes flickered with unease at my words. For the first time, cracks appeared in her armor. The children were both lifelines and reminders of what was at stake. Jessica's calls from Charlotte were laced with sorrow and encouragement. "Mom, you have to stand firm. They can't keep shutting us out forever," she said one evening through a crackling line. Michael echoed her sentiments from Columbus. "We're behind you 100%. It's time for action." Their voices rekindled my resolve. I began gathering more concrete evidence, recorded conversations, photographs of exclusionary notes sent by Dorothy, witness statements from family friends. Every item added weight to the proof that the manipulations were not circumstantial, but deliberate. Working with Patricia, I sought the counsel of an elder law attorney specializing in family disputes. We explored avenues to assert fiduciary control, to impose fiscal boundaries protecting the children and myself from further emotional and financial harm. I learned to navigate the cold halls of power with a new kind of grace, detached, strategic, and unsparing. Paperwork was prepared, plans drafted. I knew timing would be everything. Amid these preparations, I found moments of reflection beneath the gray January skies. In solitude, I remembered who I was before the walls of disdain and exclusion had enclosed me. A vibrant woman with passions, skills, and dreams, not defined by family dysfunction. One afternoon, as snow lightly dusted the streets of Concord, I met with a private investigator to discuss discreet surveillance measures to document Dorothy's financial activities and potential misuse of funds. This was not a battle I sought lightly, but a necessary defense. Each day built the scaffolding of my impending reclamation. The financial reviews, consultations with legal experts, counseling with trusted friends, all converging toward a crescendo I both feared and anticipated. Social Security benefits, Medicare payments, and bank accounts carefully structured were not mere numbers and statutes. They represented the fragile line between dependence and autonomy. I held that line steady, preparing to redraw it in more permanent, protective strokes. The depth of betrayal was starkest in the memory of that dinner invitation that never reached my children. For years, my grandchildren were the unseen ones, the silent casualties in a war of silent manipulations. Now, with the truth emerging, they were at the center of my resolve. The crescendo approached, the scene set for a confrontation away from the glare of family expectations, but within the wider circle where truth would no longer be optional. As January folded into February, the plan solidified. I was ready to turn the page from victim to victor, from silent bearer to assertive protector. And yet, beneath the layers of strategy, I remained deeply human, sometimes uncertain, sometimes frightened, but always fiercely determined. This was no longer about mere survival. It was about reclaiming a legacy. February 2024 dawned with a sharp chill in the air, but inside me burned a warmth fueled by purpose and careful planning. The silence I had maintained since Christmas no longer served me. It was time to translate years of patience into decisive action. Every morning began with reviewing the response protocols Patricia had laid out, a checklist of legal measures, financial safeguards, and communication strategies, each precise step aiming to protect my family and reclaim my dignity. One particularly decisive meeting was held in a discreet conference room at Bank of America, where Patricia introduced me to Sarah Lopez, a senior financial officer specializing in elder care and fiduciary protection. With her guidance, I learned to harness the power embedded in the accounts I managed on behalf of my mother. Dorothy's financial dependency is obvious, Sarah remarked as she scanned the latest reports. Freezing access to the primary credit cards linked to those accounts is straightforward legally. It's a protective step. You're not taking money away, just preventing misuse. I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Restricting a mother's access is a delicate matter, both ethically and emotionally fraught. Yet years of exclusion and control had left me with little choice. Later that week, I initiated the freeze on Dorothy's primary credit card, communicating with the bank under my authorized management. The action was silent but impactful, a quiet quietus beneath the surface of familial discord, ready to bubble into confrontation. At home, I managed the facade with practiced skill. During a dinner where Dorothy once again excluded my grandchildren from the guest list, I observed quietly, noting her pride in orchestrating exclusion. She smiled smugly, unaware that the card she intended to use for the evening's lavish expenses was frozen, her financial independence crumbling invisibly. Emily's calls kept me grounded. "Mom," she said with urgency, "this is our moment to stand firm. You're protecting more than banking access. You're safeguarding our family's future." Her words rang true. Protecting my children from the toxic patterns that had marginalized them was now at the forefront. I began crafting a new family narrative, one where respect, inclusion, and autonomy were non-negotiable. While navigating this intricate web of family, finances, and emotion, legal consultations intensified. Patricia prepared detailed documentation of abuses, emotional exclusion, financial manipulation, documented thanks to my journals and recordings, to support potential future actions. Simultaneously, I initiated discreet discussions with a mediator to gauge Dorothy's response to newly imposed boundaries, aiming to manage escalation and preserve dignity within limits. At a Thanksgiving gathering weeks later, Dorothy's reaction was immediate and raw when confronted with restricted access, her fury cloaked in accusations and veiled threats. But to me, it was the sound of control slipping through familiar fingers. Meanwhile, my ownership of the bank accounts grew firmer. I added protective clauses with legal oversight, ensuring Dorothy's funds would serve her real needs without being weaponized to exclude or control. In these months, I also focused on healing the fractures with my children. Jessica and Michael became pillars once fractured by their grandmother's cold treatment. We worked to rebuild trust and communication that had been long neglected. Financial independence forged the path, but emotional restoration paved the way for deeper freedom. The pivotal moment emerged unexpectedly at a family brunch in early December 2024. Dorothy attempted to manipulate the seating arrangements, once again excluding Emily's children. This time, I intervened quietly yet firmly, insisting on inclusion. The room's tension snapped. Family members exchanged glances. The balance of power had shifted subtly but irreversibly. That day marked the beginning of an authentic recalibration between mother and daughter, grandmother and grandchildren. As December waned, I prepared for the culminating confrontation that would solidify the restitution of respect owed to me and my family. But unlike before, this was not a battle waged in shadows or silence. It was a calculated movement, one designed to protect, to heal, and most importantly, to ensure that no family member would ever again be rendered invisible. The story, woven through pain and perseverance, was reaching its turning point. Barbara, no, Ruth, was ready to reclaim not just her finances, but her family and her future. When December's chill seeped into the bones of Concord, the stage was set for an evening that would echo far beyond the clinking of glasses or the laughter masked beneath forced smiles. Dorothy Miller had meticulously invited nearly everyone she deemed worthy to her favored restaurant on Main Street, except my children. To her, I was an adult child, undeserving of the sanctity granted to the rest. My grandchildren, My life's joy were deliberately erased from the celebration. In the elegant dining room of the Magnolia, softly lit chandeliers cast a golden glow over white tablecloths, silverware gleaming like promises. Dorothy arrived early, distinctly regal in her winter coat and cashmere scarf, hosting with practiced charm. She basked in the approval of relatives and longtime family friends, her smile wide as she recounted tales from Christmases past, silent to those absent in her narrative. I arrived alone, the weight of the exclusion heavier than the biting wind outside. The air held a brittle politeness, almost brittle enough to crack. The whispers of joy often reserved for such gatherings hovered faintly, but the void where my children should have sat was a deafening silence. Dorothy greeted me with warmth, a warmth that could freeze, but her eyes held a wild glint, the thrill of control sensed beneath the surface. She gestured to a seat near the hostess, a place distant from the inner circle she had created. Throughout the dinner, Dorothy relished each toast and affectionate detail, while sidestepping any mention of Jessica, Michael, Sarah, Emma, or Luke. I felt the sting, not the absence, but the unspoken judgment that I should accept it without protest. Yet I said nothing aloud. Instead, I waited. The meal unfolded: lobster bisque, roasted duck with cherry glaze, buttery mashed potatoes, Brussels sprouts seasoned with freshly ground pepper. The dishes, rich and ornate, were a stark contrast to the emotional barrenness filling the room. When it was time to settle the bill, Dorothy reached for her purse, confidence unwavering. Her reserved smile faltered when her fingers fumbled and the card was rejected. Glancing questioningly toward the server, she tried again. Still no approval. Whispers coalesced. The maitre d', a discreet professional, leaned toward me, subtle but unmistakably requested, "Madam, may I settle the account?" I nodded calmly, pulling my sleek wallet and offering my own card. The transaction proceeded smoothly as Dorothy's expression shifted from pride to confusion, then thinly veiled panic. It was then I revealed, gently but resolutely, "Mother, I hold financial authority over this account. Given the circumstances, it was necessary to restrict access." The room seemed to still. Dorothy's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes wide but defeated. She sat back rigidly, silenced before the very guests whose discretion she had expected. I watched as old power structures crumbled quietly under the weight of undeniable reality. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged glances loaded with whispered respect for the woman who calmly exposed the truth. Others, perhaps fearing future shifts in family fortunes, looked away. Dorothy attempted to salvage dignity, her voice a brittle tremor. "Ruth, this was unnecessary. You've overstepped the bounds of family grace." I replied softly, "Respect is reciprocal. Your exclusion of my children was a breach I couldn't ignore." For the first time in decades, I heard no retort, only a fragile, uncomfortable silence permeating the room. Later, as the candles flickered low and guests departed, I sat alone with my resolve blazing bright, understanding the breadth of what had just transpired. This was no simple act of financial control. It was a declaration, a boundary drawn, a legacy reclaimed. Yet I was not without reflection or vulnerability. The ache of isolation, the shadow of years trying to dampen my voice, surfaced amid the triumphant quiet. I pulled out the worn journal where I had chronicled the years, the overlooked birthdays, whispered exclusions, the tightening grip of control both subtle and overt. Each entry was a testament to endurance, a blueprint for the strategy now unfolding. From the quiet that followed that Christmas dinner, ripples extended swiftly. Emily called, her voice thick with pride and emotion. "Mom, you changed everything, not with anger, but with wisdom. This is your moment." Jessica and Michael echoed her sentiments in texts flooded with encouragement and gratitude. Family fractures began to mend. Conversations long silenced were cautiously reopened. Despite the victories, I faced new exposure. Family gatherings would never be the same. Dorothy's hostility manifest in cold distances and attempts to manipulate remaining relatives. But my boundaries were firm, my dignity shielded by years of preparation and growing strength. Finances remained a fortress, and with Patricia's guidance, I initiated formal legal restrictions, positioning myself as fiduciary with explicit powers to protect not just accounts, but the well-being of the grandchildren also vulnerable to exclusion. The coming months would be a test, not of revenge, but of resilience, balancing the delicate dance of family dynamics with the imperative to safeguard love and respect. I was no longer the silent woman who accepted invisibility. I was a strategist, a protector, and a mother unwilling to sacrifice her children's place any longer. As 2024 moved forward, the quiet empowerment born from that Christmas Eve dinner would build toward resolutions that promised deeper healing and justice, not just for myself, but for generations to come. The journey would be arduous, but for the first time, the path forward felt not like sacrifice, but like reclaiming life on my own terms. In that rediscovery lay my true strength. In the days following that unforgettable Christmas dinner, the ripples of change stretched far and wide across my fractured family. Dorothy's stoic facade cracked, revealing an arrogance tested by unexpected circumstances. She found herself isolated, not just by me, but by many who once followed her lead, unquestioningly. One cold morning in mid-January, I received a terse message from my sister Nancy. "Mom's talking. She's trying to rally some relatives against you. Says you're destroying the family." Her voice over the phone trembled with a mixture of fear and frustration. I sighed quietly. This wasn't unexpected. To those who thrived under Dorothy's control, my actions threatened old alliances and comfortable traditions, but I had no intention of retreating. What was at stake was far more important than familial approval or gossip. That week, Patricia and I met with legal counsel to formalize new financial protections. For years, Dorothy had managed to skirt accountability by relying on loose verbal agreements and informal guardianship. That era was coming to an end. "Ruth," the lawyer said as we reviewed documents, "this will give you explicit authority to manage your mother's finances and medical decisions, with court oversight. It's designed to protect her assets and well-being, but also limits her unilateral decisions that have caused harm." Signing those papers felt heavier than any previous document. It was a commitment not only to legal responsibility, but to a new dynamic, one demanding transparency, fairness, and above all, boundaries. Back at home, Dorothy's reaction was a volatile mixture of denial and desperation. When I informed her of the changes, her proud facade crumbled briefly. She accused me of betrayal, of theft, and of ungratefulness, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I did everything for this family," she shouted. "And this is how you repay me?" "Respect is earned," I responded firmly, "not coerced or demanded. We're breaking a cycle that's been harmful for too many years." The days that followed were marked by tense encounters, muted arguments, and a persistent battle to redefine family roles. But slowly, the scales began to balance. Emily arrived for a weekend visit in late January, bringing with her warmth and the fresh breath of hope. She sat beside me during a quiet evening and said, "Mom, you're not just protecting us, you're healing something that's been broken for a long time." Her words struck a chord deeper than she realized. I had learned that true power wasn't about domination, but about safeguarding dignity, love, and respect. In my professional life as a financial consultant, I found renewed purpose. Clients inspired by my courage reached out, seeking advice on reclaiming autonomy and establishing boundaries within their own families. Sharing my story, always cautiously but honestly, became a part of my healing journey. As February unfolded, the family's social dynamics began to shift. Family gatherings became less frequent but more genuine, reduced in quantity but enhanced in quality. Dorothy isolated herself from many longtime confidants as her influence waned, but those fractures brought unexpected clarity. My protective legal measures, including guardian and financial power of attorney instituted in early February, mandated reporting and oversight from elder care advocates, ensuring transparency. Importantly, they signaled to Dorothy that the era of unilateral control was over. At a family brunch on Valentine's Day, I sat with Jessica, Michael, and their partners, discussing plans for summer vacations and school events for Emma and Luke. The atmosphere was light, free from old tensions. Yet beneath the surface of joy lay cautious optimism, tempered by the scars of past betrayals. One cold afternoon in March, a letter arrived from Social Security, reiterating the changes I had enacted. Dorothy's benefits were now co-managed by legal proxies. The letter was a final seal on the transformation that had begun months before at that fateful dinner. That same month, I met with a family therapist recommended through my daughter Jessica. The sessions were humbling and replete with moments of vulnerability. I confronted feelings of guilt, resentment, and grief over lost years. But most importantly, I nurtured accountability, not as punishment, but as a path toward genuine healing. By spring's arrival, the household boundaries were more firmly drawn. Dorothy's visits were respectful, regulated, and transparent. While old resentments lingered beneath polite smiles, a new foundation of honesty and mutual respect was gradually laid. I continued slowly rebuilding a relationship with my mother, more distant but less toxic, defined by clear limits and shared responsibilities. At work, my influence grew, turning my personal trials into professional triumphs. Colleagues admired my resilience. Clients valued my wisdom. The same persistence that had carried me through family storms now propelled my career forward. Though trust with Dorothy may never fully heal, I understood that our relationship's transformation was not about restoration to the past, but about forging a sustainable future. I embraced my role as matriarch with a balance of strength and compassion, mindful that autonomy is born from respect, both given and received. That journey, marked by exclusion, confrontation, and eventual empowerment, remained etched in my memory but no longer ruled my life. I slept more peacefully at night, knowing that boundaries were honored, and that love, free from manipulation, could grow anew. In the end, true justice was not about punishment, but about reclaiming one's voice, securing dignity, and teaching even the most stubborn hearts the power of respect. The months following those turbulent events brought a new dawn. I found myself stepping into a life that, for so long, existed only in dreams. A life where my voice no longer tremblingly whispered, but confidently offered guidance and affirmation. The aftermath of confronting my mother's exclusion had cast long shadows, but now sunlight filtered through, illuminating the path toward healing and autonomy. As spring unfurled across Charlotte's gently blossoming parks and streets, I embraced a rhythm that married peace with personal growth. Morning walks along Freedom Park became a sanctuary for reflection and strength. I dedicated more time to my passion for landscape painting, capturing shades of renewal and possibility on canvas. Each brushstroke a meditation on resilience. My children, Jessica and Michael, became unwavering pillars around which family bonds gradually reknit. The laughter of grandchildren Emma and Luke, once muffled by cold silences, echoed warmly through family gatherings, now inclusive and joyous. Through countless conversations, sometimes celebratory, sometimes raw with friction, we navigated the complexities of rebuilding trust. The wounds inflicted by years of exclusion could not be erased overnight, but their edges softened with openness and intention. My mother, Dorothy, reluctantly recognized the boundaries I imposed. Though her pride bristled at times, the once unchecked matriarch began to acquiesce to legal and familial realities. She engaged sporadically with attempts to reconnect, tinged by humility and occasional remorse. One particularly poignant moment came during a spring afternoon visit. Dorothy held my hands, her gaze clouded with age and frailty. "I'm sorry, Ruth," she whispered, "for the pain I caused. The traditions I upheld grew cold and hurt those I love." I met her sorrow with compassion, tempered by caution. "Thank you for saying that, Mom. We're building something better now, together or apart, but always with respect." Professionally, my financial consultancy flourished. Clients, inspired by my journey, sought guidance not only on money management, but on navigating complicated family dynamics entwined with finances. It became a calling as much as a career. I forged partnerships with elder care advocates, legal professionals, and community organizations to support others caught in the web of familial financial control, a mission grounded in empathy born from lived experience. The legal arrangements stood firm. My fiduciary role was no longer a burden, but a vow, to safeguard resources, ensure fair treatment, and prevent shadows like those I endured from descending on others. Socially, I cultivated friendships that nourished rather than diminished. Dinner parties at my home featured laughter untainted by judgment, conversations rich with curiosity, and warmth that wrapped around every guest. In the quiet moments alone, I often reflected on the woman I had been, tentative, silenced, constrained, and marveled at the woman I had become. The transformation was neither miraculous nor swift, but painstaking, requiring unflinching honesty and steadfast resolve. I learned that justice, in its truest form, is both personal and expansive. It is not vengeance or punishment, but the courageous act of reclaiming one's own narrative and paving the way for others to do the same. As summer approached its zenith, I stood on the balcony of my home overlooking the city skyline, breathing in the humid Carolina air. The scent of jasmine and magnolia drifted upward, symbols of beauty emerging from adversity. I realized then that the boundaries I set, between myself and my mother, between my past and my future, were not walls, but gates. Gates that opened onto fields of possibility, where respect and love might once again take root. The journey ahead was still unfolding, entwined with the complexities that characterize any family. But unlike before, I faced it not as a subordinate to fear or silence, but as a woman empowered by truth, guided by wisdom, and anchored in respect. My legacy, I decided, would not be one of bitterness, but of strength earned, dignity preserved, and love freely chosen. And as the sun set over the city I now called fully home, I whispered a promise, to myself and to my children, that this chapter would be one of renewal, fortified by justice and illuminated by hope.